Hi, Matt.
Hey, Michael.
Hi, Benji.
Hi,
Hi, Rob.
Michael.
Small meeting today, but I saw you already have like 45 minutes for the topic.
Yeah. I'm only going to be able to be here for the first 30, but yeah, it's small, so I'll try to be helpful if I can be. And I have no topic, so that's fine.
Okay, cool.
It's brilliant that you did the solution criteria. I already went through it. I was a bit out of the loop. I was not there the last 2 meetings, but it's good to have now.
Yeah, hoping we can go through it a little bit today and see if there's anything anyone disagrees with in there or wants to add.
There's a link if anybody needs it.
So I think we're just waiting on Ivan to join. I've just shared a link to a Google Doc whilst there doesn't seem to be one already set up. And we may as well get started. So hello, everyone. Welcome. By joining this meeting, we've all agreed to the specification membership agreement, the participation guidelines, the contribution guide, and the code of conduct. Let's take a moment to introduce ourselves. Hello, everyone. I'm Benji.
Hi, I'm Rob.
Hi, I'm Michael.
Hi, I'm Matt.
Hi, I'm Ivan, and I'm just in time to introduce myself.
Welcome, Ivan. It would be great for help taking the notes. I've shared the link to the doc in the chat, though I think Ivan may have missed that, so I'm going to paste it again. There we go. Cool. So we only actually have really one thing on the agenda this week, which is to look at incremental delivery. And the main point of this agenda item was to bring it to the wider working group's attention. Now, all 5 of us, I believe, are members of the incremental delivery working group, though some of us maybe not as up to date as others. I'm not sure whether it would make sense to just push this agenda item to a future meeting where there might be greater attendance, or whether we should continue to discuss it now. What's your general feel?
So for me, it would be brilliant. I would be updated to the latest bit. But I don't know. What is how up to date is the user group?
I'm probably the least up to date, and honestly, the blob that Rob posted, I'm reading through that, and like it's fine. I can keep up.
Let's do it. Well,
Cool. So you wanna go ahead and do the item anyway?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. I'm not going to review any of our previous meeting items unless anyone is aware of any that have been completed. No. In which case, let's move straight on to incremental delivery. I'll pass over to Rob.
Yeah, so the big thing that we've been discussing for a while now is deduplication and kind of like just background what's merged into GraphQL JS now, and what is spec'd in my PR is a algorithm that does what we've been calling branching and no sort of duplication. Deduplication. Basically, every time it comes across a fragment with a defer, starts the execution right there with those fields and returns the results. I think a big thing that came up in the last working group meeting that we discussed it is, let me share my screen. This example, and where we're saying how, by doing this type of branching, we'd be calling the resolver of this most recent comment field more than once. You could get different results. And what we generally agreed on is that we should have a constraint that, or a requirement, I'll say, that if we're sending a result for a path, you shouldn't have the same, you shouldn't get different results for the same path. That shouldn't really be possible. Since then, Yakov isn't able to be here, but he did a lot of work on this, as well as Benji. And one thing that we wanted to clarify is that we can have both execution duplication and response duplication, and those are separate things. We could only execute the field once, but still send the results back more than once. Not saying we want to do that, but that is possible. So Yakov did some work, and he actually has a PR on GraphQL JS that doesn't, I think it's not actually a breaking change in any way with what was already there before, but it changes the algorithm so that every field only gets executed once, and then it's going down through the fields as we collect fields, keeps track of which defer each field belongs to. Could be more than one defer. If there's overlap, it does all the execution, and then before things are sent, once all the fields for a defer are done, it reassembles them back into a payload and sends that to the client. So what we've been talking about in these other meetings is that seems like a straight up improvement over what's there now. So I think we're going to work on getting that merged, even though it may not be the final direction. But since it's not breaking and it's an improvement, we're going to work on that. I do want to call attention to this spec PR that he had opened up a while back, which introduces a new function into the spec text for collect subfields, I think it's called. This already exists in GraphQL JS, and I think that this is going to be like something that we're going to need just for any kind of way forward, because we need to pass some metadata through collect subfields. It's not possible with the merge selection set function that's in here. So I do want to call this out if anyone has time to review it. I think this would be a step in the right direction that we need.
Can you post the link?
Yes. It is in the
Yeah, it's 999.
it's in the agenda, but I'll put it in the chat too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so to decide on a way forward, I worked on this solution criteria, only really covering defer now, but we'll expand it to also include stream. And I have things labeled as either critical, major, minor. And then as we compare different approaches, we can use this as a criteria over how we want to rank them. So I can talk through a few of these. Yeah, the first one, clients need to know which fragments have been delivered. That's like pretty basic. We're assuming that a client, when it puts a bunch of fields inside of a single defer fragment, that means it needs all of them back at the same time. There's no use in having one of those fields without the others. And so the client needs to know when those fields are actually there so that it could render the component that's assigned that corresponds to it, or trigger a callback or something. The client needs to know that stuff that's been deferred is resolved. That's the main idea for this, I would say, critical criteria. Up next, like we said, execution, deduplication. We don't want to execute the same field more than once. This was what we talked about in the last meeting with the final reconcilable object. And this is very similar to the previous one, but it means that there shouldn't be different data for the same path, meaning that you can't apply all of the incremental results onto the original object. I think this is just another way of saying the same thing. This is also listed as a major criteria. We should try to avoid any kind of ways of really amplifying the results. I think this could be very important, especially for a public GraphQL API server. There shouldn't be like really obvious ways to really amplify the amount of data the server will produce. Yeah, this was I think brought up by Matt, and it's like if we are doing like the type of pattern where fields are executed separately, we shouldn't really return them to the client before they could even be used. If you have like a fragment that has 3 fields in it and 2 of them are ready, the client can't do anything until all 3 are there. So there's not much use in sending them ahead of time. Fragment consistency is we don't want to do anything that's going to break this __ type name type of hack that you could use to identify that a fragment was fulfilled. There shouldn't be a state where like this footer alias on type name was delivered and resolved and me wasn't resolved yet. That would mean that the client's not able to tell that the whole fragment is there.
So I have a comment. If you go back one slide, this is kind of the same thing as both E and F. So with the not deliver them until at least one entire deferred fragment is completed. So the major requirement is that the server must provide some, the server must tell the client when the payloads are completed. A nice to have requirement, I'd argue, is that they actually happen like we don't end up with, 100 tiny payloads in order to complete one result. But that, like, this deferred payload is completed could happen because we only give completed deferred payloads, or by like, oh, we give a whole bunch of results and then, oh, at this point, here's all the things we've completed. And either of those seem fine because the client can just like keep accumulating. The client needs to keep accumulating regardless. It's just like one is probably a nicer experience because you don't trigger the accumulation path as often.
Yeah, I that makes sense.
So it's more, instead of it should not deliver them to the client until at least one, it must acknowledge when when a deferred fragment is completed.
Yeah, I think I was considering that like part of A, like you have to know that the whole fragment is there.
Okay.
Whereas this is like a
Okay.
less critical thing of saying like, why bother like sending stuff ahead of time if it's not useful?
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense to me. Yeah, I wonder if this one is a major requirement, but it also probably doesn't matter if you've already got it like implemented as is. But
yeah, I could see this being closer to minor.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, we already did fragment consistency, right?
Yeah, this feels much more important.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other one,
right.
that there's a way for fields to be deferred independently. Like the type of solution that this would rule out is that every single field and every defer everywhere in the whole query all gets returned at the same time once everything is ready, versus having, I could defer these fields A and B in one fragment and fields C and D in another fragment, and field C isn't going to hold up field A.
This would essentially, because we once discussed merging of differs, right?
Yeah.
This would be essentially ensuring that you have a mechanism to ensure that this is not happening, or that means that we are not merging at all.
Well, I think just because it's a solution criteria that's considered major, it's just something that we're going to evaluate a result on, and maybe there's an idea that like scores highly in all the other ones and doesn't do this, but there's like, it could be argued that that's the way we want to go. But just to have this documented as a thing that I think it's major, it's pretty important. And exactly how it's done will depend on like what the actual solution we go with is.
Okay.
Did that answer what you're asking?
Yeah.
And it might be that the major piece of the can be deferred independently is not like when you have, it's basically when you have two fields in different paths within the, like within different defers on different paths or at different defer locations. They don't block each other.
Yeah, okay, that's true. But I was thinking about if that means if I have two fields in the same path.
Yeah, so that I think is likely a minor criteria of like, oh, fields within a defer that could be reconcilable to the same defer can be done independently. That's like a minor thing that we might get with like fragment aliases or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah. So possible, basically, yeah, just quick feedback. Possibly this is split to be like the.
But how was it meant, Rob? Were we talking about fields in the same path where I essentially have two defers around?
I think if you think about it, there's the deferring that you might want to do at the root level as well, like where you're opening separate branches. So those are all sibling fields anyway. So I think even for the case of sibling fields, it's still major. It might be that we go for a trade-off where, you know, we make some concessions but still have most of this. But I think as a general thing, it is still major, personally.
Yeah, the question is a bit when you think in fragments, right? You could have in various fragments differs. They're actually on the same level, and you don't necessarily intend to have like a multiple differs there. It's just in your component you said, okay, this can be deferred.
The way I intended it, it's to be like intentionally vague, whereas a solution that literally only returns two payloads, one that's everything initial and one that's everything deferred, would fail this. But a solution that defers every single deferred fragment on its own would pass it. Or even one that merged everything in the same path would also pass it, because you could do tricks with aliases to achieve what you wanted.
Yeah, I think in the doc that we actually put up, or you actually put up, having the explicit, hey, this would allow for merging of same path defers. That is not like not merging them is not part of this criteria.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would make it, yeah, that would just clarify, like,
yeah,
if we want that, that's a minor thing.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult to really get the intent of the user here, right? That's
yeah, I mean, and this is meant just as like the first draft, and definitely welcoming input and not yeah. And then so this one, I think that it's still pretty important. Servers can inline individual defers or streams for various reasons. Server performance, yeah, and there's a couple different reasons that we've discussed over the past. Yeah, and then something else is how to handle non-null violations, and this one is definitely like the least concrete out of all the ones that I wrote. I think this really just describes an example, but like I think there just has to be like a cohesive way to handle non-null violations, and from here I think I can hand it over to Benji to talk about the proposal that he's worked on.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Rob. So we've covered the sort of many of the aims that we care about. So I'm just going to quickly go over some of the solutions that we've discussed. I
Do you want to share
my? I was going to say you could just keep sharing, but otherwise I'll open mine up. Share this. Cool. Can you see the same slide deck as we were looking at before? Great. Oh no, this is this will do. Some of the solutions that we've looked at before, one was to track everything, like log it all to some global kind of cache object, whether it's been delivered or not, which may well work, but it does have a lot of trade-offs. One of which is that it's complex for the server, potentially high memory requirements as well. But also I think it's quite unpleasant to factor that into what the spec edits would have to be, and it's just not ideal. So it's definitely something we can look at, but I think we should move on to an alternative. We could have the spec itself enforce that everything is cached, but this seems, I've put distasteful, not ideal. We could do, well, we thought about doing forking with independent execution. In fact, that's what we have already. But as we've already discussed, that doesn't work if we execute the same thing multiple times, because we can end up with objects that we can't merge together or various other situations. One of the options that we considered was thinking of it from the point of view of rewriting the query. So could we rewrite the query so that it had defers in different positions? But it turns out even with different ways of rewriting the query, will not solve those underlying problems if we still allow branching. It's still problematic. So that was not a solution that we could follow. Another option is only one level of defer. But we decided that that doesn't give us enough functionality. So we needed to disable that option as well. So what I think we should do is we should embrace the field merging algorithm that we already have in the GraphQL spec and see how we can modify field merging to work with this. So the idea is field merging already makes it so that we only execute each field at each path once, and we only deliver each field at each path once. So can we just use that and split it up somehow to make it incremental? So I had a look at implementing this. And as Rob said, this could be based on Yakov's pull request 999 that we had a glance at earlier. To start with, I came up with this idea of having like defer layers, where when you see a defer, that introduces a new layer. And then if you've got a defer inside of that, that would be like a nested layer. And you'd effectively merge all of the defer layers at each point in turn. This would have a number of drawbacks. One is that it wouldn't allow independent execution of sibling fields, even if they're in aliased parents, which is problematic. Another property of it was, or at least the way that it was written, was that two nested defers at the same level, so in the same selection set, would just collapse together. And that actually had consequences in various different layouts of the query that might not initially be obvious. And there was a few oversights in the spec edits that I drafted out, which Rob helpfully pointed out. I've not bothered to fix those because after much discussion, I came up with an alternative which works on the concept of incremental paths. So if you think of a path, rather than being the string path that we normally think of it in terms of the actual selection objects, like the field selection, the fragment spread, or inline fragment spread. Any of those that have a defer on them effectively build up a path for each field. And when I say field, I don't mean a field at a given path. I mean literally a field in the query, like a field in the collect fields sense, where you take lots and lots of fields that represent the same path and you put them into the same set. I'm talking about the individual entries in that set. In the GraphQL spec currently, when we do collect fields, we build up that set, and then generally we just take the first item in it because we've already validated that all the items inside are basically the same, other than their selection sets. In this, we wouldn't be doing that. We'd actually be looking at all of them, but we already have that as part of collect fields, so it's an interesting thing to do. Thus, only executing each field once and only delivering each field once would just be a natural consequence of the way of building this based on collect fields. There wouldn't need to be any explicit like caching and things like that. It's just a natural consequence of how things work. And at each stage, we can think of it as collect fields determining the things that need to be executed now and the things that need to be executed later.
Just regarding the incremental path, that is the same path we have already, like the field path, or what's the difference exactly?
Conceptually, it is actually, think of it as AST nodes. So the AST node from the document that represents the actual fragment or the actual field selection or similar.
So it's essentially without the indexers. Or Like the field paths always had these indexers of the exact item position, right? If we think about AST
Yes.
passes, that would be without these indexers.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I'd have to look concretely at the actual spec edits to answer that, but I think because of the way that collect fields works, it only looks at one level anyway, so the index isn't actually important at that point.
Yeah.
All you care about
Right.
is why it's deferred. You don't care about actually what index it is in. Like you will need
you're
that.
right. You're right because you're only interested in the overall structure of the query. Because,
yeah, you can think of it as looking at the actual instances of the @defer directive itself or the @stream directive itself, but really I'm looking at what it's attached to. So the selection, but it's kind of the same thing really. Anyway, so the collect fields would split things into things to execute now and things to execute later. You execute all the now stuff, and then you move on to the next bit, which is when later becomes now, and you do the same thing again, walking through all the selections. Now, there is some interesting things that actually have to go on to make this work, but there's some really interesting side effects of this, one of which is that the annoyingly, I've deleted that slide. Each leaf will only be delivered once. And when we come to merging in the results, we only would be doing additive merges. So if you've got a list with a stream, you'd just be adding to the end of it, appending to the end. If you've got an object that already had previous fields, the only thing you'd be doing is adding new keys. You'd never overwrite old keys or do any deep merging. You wouldn't need to do any of that. You're only ever adding, which massively simplifies the work that the client needs to do. There are complexities around when you have like two deferred fragments at the same level that overlap based on a field, especially around the error handling that Rob was talking about earlier. But those are solvable. Rob's actually came up with a solution for this, which is effectively to take the shared bit in the middle of the Venn diagram, if you like, and to bundle that with whichever of the fragments completes first and send it along with that one. And then the second one won't need it because it knows it's already been sent. So there's a little bit of complexity around that, but it is solvable. The other, I think the major issue from my point of view about this, the main reason that we might consider rejecting it, but honestly, I think it's worth it not to, is that the error bubbling behavior, which is essentially if you have a deferred fragment that overlaps with a non-deferred bit or with a different deferred bit, if you've already sent parts of this fragment because it was already in previous payloads, you can't override a field that's already been delivered. So if a user object, for example, has already been sent, and now you've got a non-null violation that should have blown it up, we can't, or I don't think we should retroactively blow it up, because I think delivering data to the user and then taking it back away again and saying, whoops, shouldn't have given you that, is not ideal. So I think what we would do in this case instead is effectively blow up the entire deferred fragment. So the entire bit that was deferred that caused this non-null violation error would then blow up. And you can think of it as, if you remember client-controlled nullability, you can think of it as any shared field inside of this fragment is treated as if it's got the exclamation point, the bang, to say this is non-nullable. So therefore, it would blow up the whole thing. So that's the main thing. So then I just wanted to look at some of the actual like queries and payloads that we might get with this. I'm going to turn on the laser pointer for fun. Hooray. Now, first thing I want to note is I've put labels in here. Labels are entirely optional. And the reason that I've put them in gray is because if you were to remove this label here, then this text here would go away, but everything else would be exactly the same. Labels don't influence the grouping of anything in this solution at all. They are purely there as metadata for the client. So if the client wants to know, tell me when this defer has been completed, then that's the way of getting that information. You could do it with the dunder type name hack that we discussed earlier, or with other approaches, but this is one way of doing it. So here we look at this query, we look at everything that is not deferred, and we deliver that in the first payload. And then we notice that there are things that are going to be deferred. So we say there's a pending, it's at the path F2CF, because there is nothing before that that hasn't already been delivered. So F is where things start to change with the JK and the LM fields that are coming later. So we say there's this path here that's pending, and also this relates to our defer D1. Then we have an incremental payload that comes later that gives us this JK field. Here it is, your J and your K at the path that is specified by ID 0. So we don't need to repeat this path down here. We can reference it just using its ID. And as you can see, this is an additive change. We're just adding the JK. So effectively, it would be inserted in here. And then we say, and also there is another pending, it turns out, it's this defer here, D2 at the same path. And then we have a final incremental payload that gives us our L and M, and we're done. So that's a reasonably straightforward example. Labels are optional. Here is a more complicated example that shows this overlapping behavior that I mentioned just now. So in this case, we have a whole bunch of these defers, and all of them have this bio field. Every single one of them has this bio field. So we happen to know that the ID field executes first, right? It's already known. All the others need to be looked up from the database. ID is already known, or something like that. So when that comes in, we get this ID field, but we also get this bio field that all of these are shared. So this ID 12 gets two payloads. One is the shared bit, one is the ID itself, and then when it's done, it says, yeah, I'm done now. And now we know that ID 12 in this list is now complete. These should technically, I realize looking at it now, be in the opposite order, so that the bio field comes after the ID, so that we can maintain the order of the fields. But that's not super important. It would just be switching these two, ID to here, bio to here. And then in a later incremental, maybe all of these other fields all came at once, the name, age, date of birth, avatar, joined at last seen and location. So here they are, name, age, date of birth, etc. And each of those complete for those 0, 3, 6, and so on. But we've still got the pending ones for the other friends. So that's how that would work with the merging. This shows where we have two overlapping defers. They're overlapping, even though the defers happen at different levels. They both have the me, item, list, and item fields here, the pink ones. So initially, we deliver the me because it's not deferred here, and everything else is deferred. So it's just an empty object here. We say that we've got D1 and D2 are due to come. And then we do this shared payload, which doesn't complete. It doesn't have a done true on here. So here's a shared payload. Then we satisfy the ID field, so the blue field, for each of those items. You'll note that we've used this shared path from ID 0, and then we've appended a subpath to it too. So it would be me list 0 item, me list 1 item, and then the ID field. Once we've done all those, done is true. That means that our D1 fragment is complete. So this defer is now complete. And later, we'll get an incremental that will give us all of the value fields. We know at that point that these have already been delivered. So it's just delivering those. And again, we do done true at the end of that. And that's it done for that style of list. There's another example here which shows two overlapping things with key and value, but without any shared properties. That's those being delivered, and they can be delivered in any order, doesn't matter, but they will still be consistent. And then here is the same example again, but this time adding in that shared ID field. So it shows you that because we now have overlapping, even though they weren't previously overlapping, what we're doing is introducing this initial shared payload for each of these. This one happens to come with the key. This one happens to come with the value for the second record. It doesn't matter so long as this one is here before the ID2 comes, and this one is here before this key here comes, everything's fine. And finally, because I know I've been talking for a while, this one shows how if you have fragments at the same level that are deferred within each other, how that would work. So in this case, we load our project synchronously. Well, I say synchronously. We load our projects initially, and we defer loading our billing data. So here's our ID, avatar, and projects. Then we get billing, which gives us our tier, renewal date, and latest invoice total. But then we have these previous invoices that we wanted to load, and that's a much more expensive field. So we want to do that afterwards. It's still part of the billing widget, but it's a sub part that can be loaded later. So we defer that at this point, and then that can come in through this final payload. So that is essentially what I'm proposing, based on the field merging algorithms with a few accommodations.
So the way we determine that we delivered something is that we track essentially in a hash set or somewhere that a certain path is delivered. Or what's the idea?
Yeah, in the spec algorithm, it's doing something like making a record for every defer, and then assigning the fields that are executing for it into a list. And but if there's overlapping fields, it's the same reference to the same object for that field would go in both lists. And then we would store a flag on it that says it was delivered, so you know to skip it when you're doing the other one, or put a reference in like in an array in a set somewhere that says this one, or keep track of a set of like all the fields that have been delivered already.
Do we have already, like you said, spec edit, do we have already some spec edits for this?
We have spec edits for an earlier version of this, which was the 1A that I failed.
Okay.
I haven't had time to write up this 2C yet.
And we have spec edits for the one that I did that grouped everything by path.
Yeah.
But I think it's very similar to that, just not doing it by defer path, but by doing it by the actual defer fragment spread.
Yeah.
Effectively, slightly different to what Rob said for the gathering of the data. Effectively, it would be where currently in collect fields, we build this this map from the response key to a set of fields that match that response key. Instead of having the fields for each of those, we would have a record that contains the field and some additional information. Often, like one of the pieces of additional information would be the parent value. Yeah, something like that, so that we don't need to reevaluate it.
Yeah.
And Yakov's implementation in GraphQL JS, I think, does almost exactly this, except then it goes even further and reassembles the individual fields back into the payload shape of like what we have that mimics doing the branching. I think it would actually like delete a bunch of code out of his implementation to get to what we have here. but I think he did all of the work of annotating the fields during the collect fields algorithm and handling the execution of them.
Yeah. Do you have a link to that PR from him?
Yeah, let me get that.
That would be brilliant.
He
What-
has
what-
both the GraphQL JS implementation, and he's also written up a spec PR for it as well. So there's a lot of information there now.
What I like from the slides here is that we have ID again, because that will speed up a lot in the client. We don't have to handle passes. We essentially can just track the things with the IDs, the patches.
Yeah, I agree. But I should mention that the ID is fairly interchangeable between solutions, so we can decide on using that separately. But it is my preference because without it, you have to do that navigation on the client a lot more, and B, it inflates the payloads. So I do prefer to have the ID.
Yeah, it's also nice when you explain it. It's very easy to reason about the flow. Otherwise, you have to always look really at the path. And here it's very, very nice to reason about the stream, how it belongs together. Awesome. Thank you, Rob. I have a lot of reading to do.
Benja, can you share like URL to presentation? You on mute.
It's already in the chat.
In
It's
the
the
beginning.
one with presentation in the URL.
Yeah, you GraphQL Foundation today. Yeah.
Yeah, I also thought first it's Lee, but
Yeah, I guess I've been added as a co-host or something. I don't really know.
So it's like one presentation. It's not two separate presentation. You and Rob basically showed one slide deck, right? Okay. Now I get it. Actually, like in the middle, I had a call in the middle. I needed to respond to some stuff, so I will rewatch a recording. One thing I'm like I'm thinking about is that currently we assume by default fragments are independent, and we go into a lot of trouble to make them concurrent. But in reality, it's like it's concurrent by implicitly concurrent, and you can make it explicitly non-concurrent if you use labels, right? In your proposal, if I put like label with the same name on two fragments, they like became tied, merged or not?
yeah. So the way the way you framed it, it has nothing to do. But that's an interesting question. If you have that, you have a collision of the label. So what did you do? You print out, or is it really prohibiting merging then?
The labels are purely informational. Whether we add a validation rule that indicates that labels must be unique is a complete opinion-based choice. Labels are not necessary and do not have any effect on the payloads other than adding that additional piece of information.
Yeah, so
that's actually what the implementation that's in GraphQL JS now with the branching does. It doesn't do any merging based on labels or anything. It just if they're there, they're used to.
Yeah, what I kind of like is your previous proposal where we treat the differ as layers when we squash everything together. And I think it's like, in a sense, having like basically like everything squashed together on the same level and shipped as the same blob, except if you put like a label and stuff with the same label merged together. So it's like basically very, very similar to what you do right now. The big difference is that stuff is like merged and squashed by default, and to signify that you actually need stuff to be independent, you add label. And if you add the same label to a couple of different fragments, they shipped like on the same defer label. So like you to A, right? Or like layer by layer thing. Onion proposal. I would call it onion proposal. So like in onion proposal, I like combination with labels. I think like one layer, and I would think if it can solve like all the issues or not, because like in a current proposal, it's like too much things happening, and we don't like, basically we give fragment influence on the response. Like what I like in your squashing proposal, everything is squashed. Number of like items and overhead of defer is pretty low by default. And it's also very deterministic by default. So unless you add like labels, you will always get the same payloads in the same order. You will never get like anything in different order. So it's good for like for testing, for like everything is predictable. It's not predictable how much time it takes to get like a second layer, but it's predictable that second layer will come, and obviously you can make like it's less predictable by adding labels, and in that case like stuff ships like whatever label is ready first. But by default it's like deterministic, and by default it's like overhead as well. So I'm like still thinking onion proposal is like really good, and for me it's like fit spirit of like, not spirit, but like mental model of GraphQL today. Fragments are client-side things. They don't influence like they don't influence the response by itself, and also like stuff gets merged. So it's like onion proposal. It's logically it's like you put defer on a fragment, but you really put defer on a field in a sense. It's like, yes, I will try to think. I will look through slides and try to think. Is it possible to push like onion proposal to meet more criteria, solution criteria that it does today?
I feel like it is easier to test, easier to conceptualize what the response is going to be, but I feel my gut feeling is that that's not what people who are writing defer are going to want. Like it's just basically going to be everyone is going to write a unique label, just for the reason of having them not be tied to unrelated parts of the query. It's also I've basically only ever used GraphQL with relay or something like it, where your fragments are tied tightly to your components. And so that's how I think about it. But so maybe I'm biased in that way, but
yeah, I think you bias in a way that if stuff is automatically composed, as we discussed, like even in initial proposal, I don't remember if it was Matt said or somebody else, like they will do unique labels anyway, in like, oh, so I think like complex frameworks, people who use complex frameworks as a relay, for them it will be invisible thing. People who use like Apollo and have like 20 fragments, they need to manage it by hand, in a sense. Not by hand, Apollo will provide something, but basically you don't have like component tied to a fragment. You get like some. I think I need to look like how Apollo implemented Apollo client implemented D4 right now, but I expect it's not that magical as relay in a sense. So maybe people who actually create query by hand, I'm not sure that they will want like everything is to be super asynchronous, because if they create query by hand, they need to use data by hand in a sense.
So I completely disagree with that. Being someone who writes queries by hand, one of the things is if I'm writing it by hand anyway, then I'll put the defers where I want them to be, right? I'm not going to need the system to merge my defers together for me, because I will specifically put them around the things that I want deferred independently. And separately, one of the use cases that I have for defers is for like a reporting dashboard style thing, where you have a lot of widgets, and those widgets, have top level data, and then often they have like further deeper data that they need to get. So they might have like a headline figure, and then they have like a full-on graph or like a plot. And I want these to come in as they are ready. And it might be like the sixth one loads in first, and then this one, and then the graph appears, and then so on and so forth. So I want all these siblings to be independently deferrable, and I want them to be able to support the nested defers inside of each of them as well. Now, if I didn't want them all deferred, like if I wanted them deferred together, then I'd just put them in one defer fragment, right? I wouldn't put them it's more typing to put them in separate defers. So I feel like if the programmer is saying, I want these in separate defers, we should probably respect that.
Yeah, it's a good argument. I didn't thought about it, because like Apollo is kind of in the middle. People usually put fragments near the components, so they don't. So there is like three paradigms. Relay, it's like you tied fragment to a component, and everything assembled after magically. There is like your paradigm when you handcraft the thing, and there is like thing in the middle where fragments and components collocated, but you assemble query manually, and you push data from a query to components also manually. So I was referring to that, but your case is right. If I put
to be clear, the
in...
middle case is what I do. So like my components, each of those widgets would have their own fragment, but then I would compose them together, and I would probably put the defer where I do those fragment spreads. So each of the widgets would be at deferred, the fragment there.
that's also how you would do it with Relay.
I need to think. Yeah, I kind of start getting it in a sense. Like, yeah, you probably don't want. Basically, in their proposal, you have like couple re-renders, but you have like initially you have like initial data and bunch of like spinners, and when you will have like one layer of components rendered in one go, and one like and it will look weird. And yeah, in dashboard scenario, I agree. It's kind of like, especially if it's like really heavy data, like statistics or something. Basically, like something simple would stack on something. Yeah.
The other comment that I have on this is, originally I was quite a big proponent of merging the defers together, but that was when we had forking, when we had branching, because merging them together was solving a lot of that repetitive delivery of the data, the duplicate execution and all that other stuff. It was kind of squashing it together as a, you know, as a side effect. Like, that's why I was a proponent of it. But now that we've decided that we shouldn't be executing fields more than once, and I think that is a concrete requirement at this point. Like, we are actually backporting that into the existing implementation of stream and defer. So not executing things twice, I think, is concrete. Not delivering things twice, I think, is a fairly reasonably obvious extension that we should aim for. I think it's very important. I don't see any value in delivering things twice, but it is a separate concern, as Rob mentioned earlier. But again, if we can avoid both of those things, then the reason for merging these defers together kind of goes away, really. Like, there's not a huge amount of additional cost to delivering these things separately versus delivering them all together. The amount of data being sent over the wire is not much bigger. The amount of work that the client needs to do is really not much bigger. And it gives us more, it lets the user be more expressive about what order of operations they need to happen. Even potentially doing a defer inside of a defer at the same level of the selection set can be enabled. And that is exactly what I would want to do in my widgets example.
Right. Good that we have. Yeah, good that we have solution criteria now. It's when I will think, I will have like a list to compare. Yeah, so definitely way forward.
Lots of food for thought, I think. Did anyone have anything else that they wanted to discuss today?
Does it make sense to have a meeting on Monday? Do you think we'll have like stuff to discuss before Monday?
I think this list that Rob has prepared is worth additional discussion. And a lot of what we've done today is like surfacing those topics. But I think some actual debate around each individual one, like whether it is high or low, like we had today, the discussion of whether the certain criteria, like what does it mean? Should this be two, one where one's major and one's minor? That kind of stuff I think would be valuable. But other than that, like, I haven't made any further progress on my proposal currently.
Yeah, so, also, like Monday is like in Germany and Switzerland, it's Eastern.
That is a really good point, actually. And given that so few people attended today, I suspect that might be the case on Monday too. Yeah, let's skip Monday. Rob, can you reach out to the relevant parties?
Yeah. One thing to prepare to make like this process of discussing effective. So what you have in mind, it's like we will get one criteria and have around of a table and discuss it and brainstorm like on the spot, or preparing PRs are more effective. What's your feel?
What would be great is if we get the GraphQL JS pull request that we have there, reduced to the part that we think it should be. I will also put some work in to have a branch of hot chocolate that implements that, but I have to first read through all the material that I gathered here.
I mean, like criteria.
Like
since we discussed criteria.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
it was...
I thought we were discussing on the solution that we have.
No, like yeah, like first we need to have like criteria, and then we will have solutions.
So I think one of the most important things is if you have more solution criteria, even if they're not ones that you necessarily think that we definitely need, right? They're just things that you think would be nice to have. Let's get them in that list. Like it would be great to add them. So those should be done through pull requests. If you feel that any of the content that Rob has written is unclear or has a mistake in it or anything like that, that should be a pull request, a separate one that fixes one small issue. And Rob can look at that and decide whether or not he agrees. If he doesn't agree, it's a discussion point. If he does agree, it's a merge. Yeah, but I think when it comes to the actual weighting of them, then that is more a discussion, and it won't, I don't think we'll just go through them one by one. Because I think a lot of them, we've been discussing this for many weeks now between the whole group, right? So many of them are fairly consensus anyway. So what I think it would be is we open it to the room for someone to say, I don't feel that this one should be a major, I think it's minor, or I think this one is critical, or whatever. And then we discuss that one that is controversial rather than going through each one in turn, which I think might be a waste.
But but regarding solutions, so the solution you guys are working on, or the proposal that you guys made, that is something like, that is something where you feel that we should go, or is it are we still like just throwing things on the wall? And
yeah, it's on the wall situation. I think we kind of have three solutions at the moment. One of them is Yakov's solution, of which we will probably be adopting part of it into GraphQL.js currently to fix the existing double execution issue that needs to be solved because it's a major issue as raised by Kwaku. But then based on that, there is the further extension of Yakov's solution that may be a better fit for stream and defer overall. There's my proposal that is based on field merging, which borrows a bit from Rob's proposal. And there's Rob's proposal, which I think is also quite similar, that borrows a bit from mine. But they are different, but like a bit overlapping. And I think we are sort of trying to ferry them all, like to find what this ultimate final location is. So I think we're still iterating on all of them. Rob's coming up with brilliant problems.
but like what is it? The last that you showed now, that was my proposal, the field merging proposal, which is an evolution of the one that I proposed just under a month ago. Okay, but like we crossed a couple of solutions out or in the beginning of the presentation. So what are the competing solutions that we have now at the moment? It's so this that you presented?
Yakov's one, which I think has spec PR and JS PR. I think they're both up to date. Is that right, Rob?
Yep.
We've got my one, which is literally these slides. I did have spec edits for a previous version of this, but they are not right for this, and I need to spend some time rewriting them.
Yeah. And
we've got Rob's one, which has actual more up-to-date spec edits that handles things like I'm
withdrawing mine because because I mean I think there was like a good amount of pushback against the deferring, and I think that I agree as well. Like mine was the version that is the same as yours but does all of the batching at the defer path level instead of each individual defer fragment. And I think that with your arguments of it's not necessary like to do that when we have the results being delivered the way they are, I think it makes sense to withdraw it.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'll be merging somewhat of your PR into mine anyway. I mean, they're very similar. We've bounced ideas off of each other quite a lot. Like it's definitely a collaborative effort. Yeah, cool. So those are the two main ones then, I guess, is mine and Rob's and Yakov's.
Yeah, and the real difference between them is, I think, it's the delivering of these fields is as their own incremental objects, or reassembling it back into an incremental object that resembles the deferred fragment. In your example, literally is like my Benji proposal. That one is no field is ever sent twice, where Yakov's, its leaves aren't sent twice, but by necessity, intermediary objects have to be sent twice because we need a place to put those leaves that are in different defers. Everything else, IDs, labels, stuff like that, what the paths look like, I think those could apply to either one, but they're not necessarily like, I don't think it's take it or leave it for either one. So like that's really what I want to like decide on before we start like workshopping like other more minor details. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I annoyingly, whilst you were talking then, was thinking about the differences between them, and I think I've come up with a problem that neither of them solves. And that is, at the moment, the spec for non-stream defer, the spec guarantees the order of the fields that will be delivered matches the order that they are in the document, like according to the field collection algorithm. And I think both Yakov's solution and probably my solution, my solution too, don't respect that. They will generally do it, but like if this defer that was later gets solved first, then it will be merged in and the others will be added afterwards. So then the order of those fields won't be maintained. We don't have that as a solution criteria. So let's add it as one. And I personally think it's probably minor, and we probably will skip that because I think it'll be a nightmare to achieve. And I'm not sure there's much value there. But what I think we should do is find out the people that think that that ordering is important, which may be a case of going back to like 2015 and seeing who said that this text in the spec should say that it's an ordered map, for example, and then talking to them and finding out what the reasons are for that, and then investigating whether it is actually an important issue or not.
Yeah,
But didn't we take it out because like the GraphQL.net guys, they had a problem with hash maps. I mean, they implemented these maps with hash maps, and that was the issue was because why we changed that and said it's not important.
Yeah, and I can provide like feedback.
But it's actually that they didn't know their library well, because in .NET you have also ordered maps. That's what we do in Hot Chocolate.
No, I think it was Go, and Go at least like.
No, like, it was GraphQL.net. I was in the discussion back then.
Ah, okay. Maybe we had separate one from Go, because Go also don't have. Like,
Go has also this problem.
Yeah, I remember people from Go actually reporting it. Maybe a separate issue. So yeah, I think Go was one, and second was .NET, and Lee decided if it's already two. So it's because debuggability, so ability to debug, it's easier, and also as far as I understand, Facebook had some experiments with binary formats for mobile phones. So, and in those experiments, they relied on the order of fields, but now it's not required. So I would say it like that: inside one data property, order should be like the same, but between incrementals, it's not important. I'm for keeping order predictable in
Yeah,
inside data.
yeah, I think so. It's in the response section. It says it doesn't have to be ordered in the response. Yeah, just because I think
It's
what tooling
recommended
there,
to order.
yeah, what, yeah, exactly. What Benji posted, the execute selection said that it should be ordered. It says it's ordered, but later in the response section, it said there is a note that it doesn't have to be ordered. But I think from like in general, I also prefer it to be ordered, because when you see like query to response in GraphQL, when you debug things, it's very nice for the user. Like it's a very good effect, especially when you start with GraphQL. Yeah, but the same is also with the errors object, right? If there is errors, the spec recommends it to put it first.
So currently the data and errors object is explicitly an unordered map. And yes, it may be that we recommend putting errors first, but
yeah,
strictly it is an unordered map, whereas the execution of selection sets is an ordered map. But yeah, as you say, when it comes to delivering it, it is a should rather than a must.
Yeah, because there's a note specifically under that when errors is present in the response, it may be helpful to appear first in the serialized result. I mean, we could.
Yeah,
May is one notch lower than should.
Yeah, I wrote added error part because for Star Wars API for a long time we had errors and nobody saw them because there was like under big dump of data, nobody like actually listed graphical.
Yeah, and
so
I think it's a good recommendation. It's a super recommendation. We also put it on first because that's if you have a lot of data, you don't see the errors. So it's a good recommendation. So I was not arguing against it.
Okay, well, this has been a fruitful discussion. So thank you all. We will reconvene to discuss incremental delivery a week on Monday. And I think we have another working group next week, general working group. So see you at one of those. Yeah,
but we are not reconvening on Monday. Oh, we're skipping Monday.
A week on Monday.
A week on Monday. Okay, sorry. Okay, guys.
Bye.
Have a nice Easter.
Happy Easter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.